Vinny followed Sinatra down the carpeted hallway, their footsteps muffled by the thick Persian runners that lined the Sands executive floor. The air conditioning hummed overhead, but sweat still gathered at the base of Vinny's neck. Behind them, Lucky Luciano moved with the careful precision of a man who'd survived 40 years in a business that killed most men in 4. The back room smelled of Cuban cigars and old money, Sinatra's private meeting space, where deals were made that never appeared in any ledger. Frank gestured to the leather chairs arranged around a mahogany table, but Luciano remained standing. At 63, the man who'd built the modern American mob looked smaller than his legend suggested, yet Vinny could feel the danger radiating from him like heat from a furnace. "Vincent," Sinatra said, his voice carrying that familiar edge that meant business was about to turn deadly serious. "Close the door. Nobody comes in. Nobody goes out." Vinny's hand hadn't left his gun since the lobby. He positioned himself between the door and Luciano, watching the old man's every movement. Lucky smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "Relax, kid. If I wanted Frank dead, you'd already be measuring him for a casket. That's exactly what worries me," Vinny muttered. Luciano laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "Smart boy, Frankie. Keeps his mouth shut and his eyes open. Good qualities in this business." Sinatra moved to the bar, his movements too casual, too controlled. When Frank got nervous, he overperformed normal. Ice clinked against crystal as he poured 3 fingers of bourbon, then thought better of it and added a 4th. "Charlie wants to make a deal," Frank said, using Luciano's real name. "Something that changes how we do business in Vegas. Permanently." Vinny's pulse quickened. Changes in the Vegas power structure meant bodies. It meant wars between families that lasted decades. It meant men like him caught in the crossfire while their bosses played chess with human lives. Luciano reached inside his jacket, Vinny's. 38 cleared leather before the old man's hand emerged holding a manila envelope. "Easy, soldier." Luciano's voice carried amusement, but his eyes had gone flat and dangerous. Just some photographs, pictures of meetings, important people doing things they shouldn't be doing with other important people they shouldn't know. He placed the envelope on the table between them. "There's going to be an election in 2 years. Young senator from Massachusetts, good-looking kid with a famous daddy. Jack Kennedy's going to need all the help he can get." Sinatra's hand froze halfway to his mouth. "You want me to help elect a president?" "I want you to help elect our president." Luciano opened the envelope, spreading black and white photographs across the mahogany surface. "Joe Kennedy's been washing our money through his liquor business for 30 years. Time to collect on old debts." Vinny couldn't see the photos from his position by the door, but he watched Sinatra's face go pale as he studied them. Frank's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath his skin. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Charlie?" "Use your connections. Hollywood people, entertainers, politicians who owe you favors. Get them to support Kennedy, publicly and privately. In return, when he wins, we get Nevada, all of it. The Gaming Commission, the state legislature, the governor's office, clean books, no federal interference, and the biggest money-washing operation in American history." The room fell silent except for the air conditioning's mechanical whisper. Vinny watched Sinatra's reflection in the window overlooking the strip. Neon signs painted Frank's face in alternating red and blue, making him look like a man caught between heaven and hell. "And if Kennedy loses?" Luciano's smile disappeared entirely. "Then we make sure the winner understands the new rules anyway, but it's better for everyone if Kennedy wins clean." Vinny understood the subtext. They were talking about rigging a presidential election, about turning the White House into a front for organized crime, about fundamentally altering the balance of power in America. Sinatra picked up one of the photographs, studied it, then set it down carefully. "How do I know you won't use these same pictures against me later?" "Because, Frankie, after tonight, we're going to be partners, equal partners, and partners don't betray partners." Luciano's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "They eliminate threats to their partnership." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Vinny's grip tightened on his gun. In the space of 20 minutes, he'd watched his boss get recruited into a conspiracy that reached all the way to Washington. A conspiracy that would make anyone who knew about it a target for the rest of their lives, including him. The weight of what he'd just heard settled in Vinny's chest like a stone dropping into dark water. 13 years had passed since that December night in 1960, but standing in the security office of the Boardwalk Casino in Atlantic City, watching the rain streak down bulletproof glass, he could still feel Luciano's words crawling under his skin like spiders. They eliminate threats to their partnership. Vinny touched the scar over his heart, a puckered reminder of the night in '62 when someone had tried to eliminate him. The bullet had been meant for Sinatra, but Vinny had moved faster than his brain could process the danger. 3 months in a hospital bed had given him plenty of time to think about loyalty, about the price of keeping secrets, about the difference between protecting a man and becoming his prisoner. He'd left Sinatra's employ in '65, taking his silence and his scars to the Jersey Shore. Frank had understood, maybe even respected him for it. The handshake goodbye had lasted longer than necessary, and Frank's eyes had held something that might have been gratitude or might have been relief. Either way, Vinny had walked away from Las Vegas with enough money to disappear and enough sense to stay disappeared. The Boardwalk Casino wasn't the Sands. No celebrities. No high-stakes games that could buy and sell small countries. Just working-class gamblers feeding quarters into slot machines and retirees playing penny poker. The kind of place where the biggest crisis was usually a drunk fisherman who couldn't accept that the house always won. Vinny liked it that way. Predictable. Safe. "Mr. Torino?" Angela Delacroix stood in the doorway, her uniform crisp despite the end of her shift. At 24, she reminded Vinny of his daughter, if he'd been lucky enough to have one. Angela had started as a cocktail waitress 6 months ago, but Vinny had noticed how she watched everything, how she remembered faces, how she could spot trouble before it started. He'd convinced the owner to let her work part-time in security. Good instincts were harder to find than good looks. "What is it, Angie?" "Table 7's got a problem. Guy's been losing all night, and he's starting to make noise about the cards being marked." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Thing is, I think he might be right. Tommy's been dealing, and his breaks don't match the schedule." Vinny felt his old instincts kick in. Tommy Marconi was the owner's nephew, 22 years old and stupid enough to think skimming was a victimless crime. In a place like the Boardwalk, small-time theft could grow into big-time problems fast. "Where's Tommy now?" "Bathroom. Been there 10 minutes. Vinny nodded. In Vegas, Tommy would have been found in an alley behind the casino with his hands broken. Here, they'd just fire him and hope his uncle learned to hire family with working brains. But first, they had to handle the angry customer without starting a riot that would bring the State Gaming Commission sniffing around. "I'll take care of Table 7. You watch Tommy. He comes back. You keep him away from the floor until I'm done." Angela's smile was quick and grateful. "Thanks, Mr. Torino. I know I'm still learning." "You're learning fine." He meant it. Angela had the kind of sharp intelligence that reminded him why he'd survived 15 years in Sinatra's orbit. She saw connections, anticipated problems, understood that in the casino business, prevention was worth a dozen cures. Just remember, we're not cops. We're not judges. We're janitors. We clean up messes before they get too big to handle. As Angela headed back to the floor, Vinny caught his reflection in the window. 62 years old, gray at the temples, lines around his eyes that told the story of too many late nights and too many secrets. He looked like what he was, a man who'd seen enough violence to last 3 lifetimes and wanted nothing more than to finish his days in peace. The rain was getting heavier, turning the boardwalk into a blur of neon and shadow. Somewhere out there, tourists were ducking into bars and souvenir shops, complaining about their ruined vacation plans. They had no idea how lucky they were to have such simple problems. Vinny straightened his tie and headed for the floor. Table 7 was easy to spot. 5 players, one of them red-faced and gesticulating while the others looked ready to bolt. Standard casino crisis, the kind Vinny had handled 100 times before. But as he walked across the carpeted gaming floor, past the familiar sounds of slot machines and quiet conversation, something cold touched the base of his skull. The feeling he'd learned to trust in Vegas, the one that had kept him alive when smarter men died. Something was wrong, not with Table 7, not with Tommy's amateur hour theft scheme. Something bigger, something that made his scar ache and his fingers itch for the gun he no longer carried. The feeling of being watched by eyes that knew exactly who he used to be. Vinny's eyes swept the casino floor with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd spent decades cataloging threats. The angry player at table 7 was still making noise, but that felt secondary now, background static compared to the electric tension crawling up his spine. He paused beside a bank of slot machines, using their flashing lights as cover while he scanned the room. There, by the blackjack tables near the far wall, a man in an expensive overcoat, charcoal gray wool that probably cost more than most of the boardwalk's dealers made in a month. He stood with his back partially turned, but something about the set of his shoulders, the way he held his head, sent recognition shooting through Vinny's nervous system like ice water. It couldn't be. Charlie Luciano was in his 70s now, supposedly retired to Italy, living quietly on a government pension and old grudges. But the man by the blackjack table moved with that same careful precision, that predatory stillness that had made Lucky the most dangerous man in any room for 40 years. Vinny's hand moved instinctively toward his hip, muscle memory reaching for a gun that wasn't there. He'd stopped carrying after the 3rd year in Atlantic City, when the nightmares finally faded and he'd convinced himself that Vincent Torino, the casino security chief, had successfully buried Vinny the bodyguard. Now he felt naked, exposed, like a soldier who'd thrown away his rifle only to find himself back in a war zone. The man turned slightly, and Vinny caught a glimpse of his profile. Older, more weathered, but unmistakably Charlie Luciano, the architect of the modern American mob, the man who'd sat across from Sinatra 13 years ago and casually discussed buying a presidency. Here, in Vinny's carefully constructed sanctuary. But Luciano wasn't alone. A young woman stood beside him, maybe 25, with dark hair that caught the casino lights like silk. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than Angela made in 6 months, and when she turned to say something to Luciano, Vinny's breath caught in his throat. The face was impossible, heart-shaped, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to hold secrets even from across a crowded room. Features that belonged to someone who should have been impossible to forget, but equally impossible to see again, Ava Gardner, or someone who looked exactly like Ava Gardner had looked 20 years ago. Vinny's scar began to throb, a phantom pain that always accompanied memories of Vegas in the early 60s. Ava had been gone by then, her marriage to Sinatra a beautiful wreckage in the rearview mirror, but Frank still carried her ghost in every song, every late-night drink, every woman who wasn't quite beautiful enough to make him forget. The young woman laughed at something Luciano said, and the sound carried across the casino floor like a bell tolling. It was Ava's laugh, rich and knowing, the kind that promised secrets and delivered heartbreak. Vinny had heard it a dozen times during those last desperate months, when Frank still thought he could win her back through sheer force of wanting. She's carrying evidence of that fateful 1960 meeting. The thought came from nowhere, a certainty that settled in his gut like lead. This wasn't coincidence. Charlie Luciano didn't travel to Atlantic City to play nickel slots, and women who looked like Hollywood legends didn't accompany aging crime bosses on casual casino visits. This was business, the kind of business that left bodies in its wake. Vinny forced himself to move, walking toward table 7 while keeping the impossible pair in his peripheral vision. His mind raced through possibilities, each more dangerous than the last. Had someone talked? Had the Kennedy connection finally surfaced after 13 years of careful burial? Or was this about Sinatra himself? The chairman had made plenty of enemies over the decades, men who might think Vincent Torino knew enough secrets to be worth killing. The angry player at table 7 saw him coming and raised his voice another notch. About time security showed up. This game's crooked as a pretzel, and I want my money back. Vinny nodded and smiled, playing the part of the concerned casino executive, while his mind screamed warnings. "Sir, I apologize for the delay. Let's step away from the table and discuss this privately." As he guided the complaining customer toward his office, Vinny caught another glimpse of Luciano and the woman. They were moving now, walking slowly through the casino with the casual confidence of tourists who had all the time in the world, but Vinny could see the way Luciano's eyes tracked security cameras, the way the woman's purse stayed carefully positioned against her body, protecting whatever she carried inside. The cold certainty crystallized in his chest. They were here for him. After 13 years of peace, the ghosts of December 1960 had finally caught up with Vincent Torino. And whatever they wanted, whatever they knew, his quiet life in Atlantic City was about to become another casualty of secrets that should have died in a back room at the Sands. The past had just walked through his front door, wearing an impossible face and carrying deadly intentions. The complaining customer was still talking, his voice a distant buzz as Vinny guided him toward the manager's office. Something about marked cards and crooked dealers, the usual litany of accusations that losing gamblers hurled when Lady Luck turned her back. Vinny made the appropriate sounds, sympathetic murmurs, promises to investigate, while his attention remained locked on the two figures now moving deeper into the casino. "You listening to me?" The customer grabbed Vinny's sleeve. "I said I want compensation for my losses. This whole operation's dirty." "Of course, sir. Let me get my manager." Vinny gently extracted his arm and flagged down Pete Russo, the night shift supervisor. A quick, whispered conversation transferred the problem, leaving Vinny free to shadow his real concern. But when he turned back toward the gaming floor, Luciano and the woman had vanished. Vinny's pulse spiked as he scanned the room. The boardwalk wasn't large. 60 gaming tables, maybe 200 slot machines, a small sports book near the back. Not enough space for anyone to truly disappear, especially not a man of Luciano's distinctive bearing. Yet somehow they'd melted into the crowd like smoke. Unless they hadn't been real to begin with. Vinny touched his scar again, remembering what the army doctors had told him about trauma and phantom memories. The mind playing tricks, conjuring threats from shadows and wishful thinking. Maybe 13 years of looking over his shoulder had finally caught up with him. "Mr. Torino?" Angela appeared at his elbow, her voice tight with concern. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." The irony wasn't lost on him. Just tired. Long shift. "What's the situation with Tommy?" "That's what I wanted to tell you. He never came back from the bathroom. I checked, he's not in there. And Jerry at the cage says he saw Tommy leaving through the employee exit about 10 minutes ago." Vinny frowned. Tommy running meant guilt, but it also meant loose ends. The kid knew about the casino's operational procedures, the security codes, the weekend cash drops. Information that could be valuable to the wrong people. Pull his locker. Inventory whatever he left behind. Vinny's training kicked in, the familiar comfort of solving tangible problems. And call his uncle. Family business. Family cleanup. But even as he gave the orders, his eyes kept moving across the casino floor, looking for a charcoal overcoat, for impossible cheekbones, for any sign that he hadn't imagined the whole thing. "There's something else," Angela said, her voice dropping lower. "About 20 minutes ago, I saw a woman asking questions at the front desk. Wanted to know about employment records, specifically who worked here that used to work in Vegas." The blood in Vinny's veins turned to ice water. What did she look like? Stunning, like movie star beautiful, dark hair, expensive clothes. Angela paused, studying his expression. "Mr. Torino, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Before Vinny could answer, the lights flickered. Not unusual in an Atlantic City winter storm, but the timing made his skin crawl. Emergency protocol meant checking the backup generators, ensuring the security system stayed operational, maintaining order if the power failed completely. Standard procedures that he'd drilled 100 times. But as Vinny started toward the security office, he noticed something that stopped him cold. The other staff members, dealers, pit bosses, cocktail waitresses, were moving differently. Not the casual efficiency of a normal shift, but the careful, deliberate movements of people who were afraid. Conversations died when he approached. Eyes that usually met his with friendly recognition now looked away. "Angela," he said quietly, "how long have you been watching me tonight?" She blinked, confusion flickering across her features. "What do you mean? I mean, did someone ask you to keep an eye on me? Report on my movements, my conversations?" "Mr. Torino, She stopped, her face flushing. "There might have been some questions about your background, your previous employment, but I didn't tell them anything because I don't know anything." The admission hit him like a physical blow. Someone had been asking about him, preparing the ground, gathering intelligence, which meant this wasn't a chance encounter or a figment of his imagination. This was an operation, planned and executed with the kind of precision that suggested serious backing. The lights flickered again, longer this time. In the momentary dimness, Vinny caught sight of movement near the main entrance. Two figures silhouetted against the storm-washed glass doors, one tall and lean, moving with predatory grace, the other smaller, feminine, with something metallic glinting in her hand. When the lights steadied, they were gone again. But their message was clear. They could appear and disappear at will, could make his staff nervous with a few quiet questions, could turn his sanctuary into a hunting ground whenever they chose. Vinny's hand moved toward his empty holster one more time, muscle memory grasping for comfort that wasn't there. After 13 years of peace, the war had found him again, and this time he was unarmed and alone. "Come with me," Vinny told Angela, his voice carrying an edge that made her eyes widen. "We need to talk." He led her through the employee corridor toward his office, checking over his shoulder twice before closing the door. The familiar space, desk cluttered with reports, coffee-stained chair, photographs of retirement parties he'd actually believed in, felt suddenly foreign, like a museum exhibit of a life he'd foolishly thought was real. "Sit down." Vinny moved to the window, scanning the parking lot through rain-streaked glass. "Tell me exactly what they asked you, word for word." Angela perched on the edge of the chair, her hands twisted in her lap. It was the woman, the beautiful one. She said she was from a private security firm, doing background checks for potential employment. Wanted to know about your work history, your habits, whether you'd ever mentioned Las Vegas or— she paused, color draining from her face. "Whether you'd ever mentioned Frank Sinatra." The name hit him like a slap. 13 years of careful silence. And now Sinatra's ghost was walking through his casino, asking questions that could get people killed. Vinny's reflection stared back from the window. A 62-year-old man who'd convinced himself he'd escaped when all he'd really done was dig his own grave and wait for someone to push him in. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing. I swear, Mr. Torino, I said you were professional, reliable, never talked about your past." Angela's voice cracked. But she already knew things. She knew you worked casino security in Vegas. She knew you left in 1965. She knew— Angela swallowed hard. She knew about the shooting, the scar. Vinny closed his eyes. The scar over his heart was visible only when he changed clothes, which meant either Angela had been watching him far more carefully than he'd realized, or someone had provided very detailed intelligence. Neither possibility offered comfort. "How much did she pay you, Angie?" $500. Just to observe and report. The words tumbled out in a rush of guilt and terror. "I needed the money, Mr. Torino. My mom's medical bills, and I thought it was harmless. Corporate espionage, maybe, or divorce lawyers. I never thought—" "You never thought it would get people killed." Vinny turned from the window, studying the young woman who'd reminded him of the daughter he'd never had. The betrayal should have hurt more, but after Vegas, after watching Frank's inner circle tear itself apart over money and women and power, Angela's weakness felt almost quaint. Who else did she approach? "I don't know. Maybe Jerry at the cage? He's been acting strange all week." Angela stood up, her voice desperate. "Mr. Torino, I'm sorry. I'll give the money back. I'll tell her to leave you alone. Just please don't fire me." Fire her. As if termination was the worst thing that could happen now. Vinny almost laughed, but the sound would have come out broken. Angela had no idea what she'd stumbled into, what kind of predators she'd helped circle their prey. In Vegas, informants who outlived their usefulness had a tendency to disappear into the desert. Atlantic City might be more civilized, but the people asking questions weren't. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Through the frosted glass door, Vinny could see a silhouette, feminine, familiar in its impossible elegance. "Mr. Torino? I hope I'm not interrupting." The voice belonged to Ava Gardner, if Ava Gardner had lived to be 25 again. Rich, smoky, with just enough vulnerability to make strong men want to protect her. "I was hoping we could have a private conversation." Angela's face went white. "That's her. That's the woman who—" "I know." Vinny moved toward the door, then stopped. Opening it meant acknowledging what he'd spent 13 years denying, meant stepping back into a world where loyalty was currency and silence was the only thing keeping him alive. But leaving it closed would just delay the inevitable. They'd found him. They knew who he was, what he'd witnessed, what secrets were locked in his aging memory. The question wasn't whether they'd kill him. The question was whether they'd let Angela live long enough to regret taking their money. "When I open this door," Vinny said quietly, "you get out of here. Back exit, straight to your car, drive home and pack a bag. Visit your aunt in Philadelphia, the one you mentioned last Christmas. Stay there until I call you. Mr. Torino, this isn't a discussion." He looked at her one last time, seeing himself 30 years ago. Young, naive, thinking the world made sense if you just followed the rules. Sometimes people like us get caught in the crossfire of things we don't understand. Sometimes the only way to survive is to run fast enough and far enough that the bullets miss. The woman knocked again, patient as death itself, waiting for Vincent Torino to open his door and let the past come flooding back in. Vinny's hand rested on the door handle for 3 heartbeats. Then he twisted it open. The woman who stepped into his office was even more devastating up close. Not just beautiful. That word was too small for what she was. She possessed the kind of luminous perfection that cameras loved and men died for, every feature precisely arranged as if God had been showing off. But it was the eyes that stopped his breath. Ava's eyes, green as bottle glass and twice as dangerous. "Mr. Torino." She moved with liquid grace, closing the door behind her while Angela scrambled toward the back exit. "Thank you for seeing me. I'm Elena Rossi." The surname hit him like a punch to the throat. Rossi, not Gardner, not whatever name Ava might have given a secret daughter. Rossi, which meant she belonged to the Boston family, the crew that had been muscling into Atlantic City for the past 2 years. Vinny's mind reeled, trying to reconcile the impossible resemblance with this new, deadlier reality. "You're not Ava's daughter." The words escaped before he could stop them. Elena's perfect lips curved into a smile that belonged in a confessional. "Is that what you thought? How wonderfully romantic." She settled into the chair Angela had vacated, crossing her legs with calculated precision. "No, Mr. Torino, I'm something far more dangerous than a dead woman's bastard child." She opened her purse, the same expensive bag he'd noticed on the casino floor, and withdrew a photograph, black and white, slightly faded, showing 3 men in what looked like a hotel suite. Vinny recognized the setting immediately, the presidential suite at the Sands, December 1960. And there, captured in devastating clarity, were Frank Sinatra, Lucky Luciano, and a younger Vincent Torino standing guard by the door. Remarkable what you can accomplish with plastic surgery and enough motivation. Elena studied the photograph with professional detachment. It took 18 months to get the face right. The voice coaching, the mannerisms, even the way Ava Gardner held a cigarette. All to convince one man that the impossible had walked back into his life. The revelation crashed over Vinny like a cold wave. Not Ava's daughter, not even a natural resemblance. A manufactured ghost, a weapon crafted from silicone and steel to exploit the deepest weakness of someone who thought they were untouchable. Frank. The name came out as a whisper. "You went after Frank." The chairman of the board himself. Elena's smile widened, showing teeth like pearls. Amazing how a man who survived decades of mob politics could be undone by sentiment. One glimpse of his lost love walking into the Copa, and Frank Sinatra became as manageable as a schoolboy with a crush. Vinny's scar began to throb, phantom pain mixing with very real horror. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing permanent." Yet. Elena stood, moving to the window where Vinny had stood moments before. He gave us certain information. Access codes, transportation schedules, the location of some very interesting safe deposit boxes. Amazing what secrets a man will spill when he thinks he's impressing the love of his life. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The questions about his Vegas background, the careful surveillance, Angela's recruitment, none of it had been about Vincent Torino. He'd been bait, a way to verify Elena's story when she approached Sinatra, the loyal bodyguard who'd taken a bullet for the chairman, now working quietly in Atlantic City. Proof that Elena Rossi knew things only Sinatra's inner circle would know. "You used me to get close to him." Vinny's hand moved toward his empty holster again, muscle memory seeking comfort that wasn't there. Made yourself into Ava Gardner to break him down, then drop my name to prove you were legitimate. Brilliant, isn't it? Frank always was careful about new people in his orbit, but mention his old bodyguard Vinny, the one with the bullet scar and the Atlantic City casino job, and suddenly everything checks out. Elena turned from the window, her manufactured perfection catching the office light like a blade. Men like Sinatra think loyalty means something. They never consider that loyalty can be purchased like everything else. The accusation hung in the air between them, and Vinny realized she wasn't just talking about Angela's small betrayal. She was talking about him, about choices he'd made 13 years ago that he'd convinced himself were noble. You think Frank betrayed someone, Vinny said slowly. That night in December, the meeting with Luciano. Elena's smile turned predatory. I don't think anything, Mr. Torino. I know. Just like I know you've been carrying the guilt ever since, wondering if keeping Frank's secrets was worth what happened after. Wondering if the bullet you took was really meant for him, or if someone wanted you alive to remember what you'd seen. The words hit him like physical blows, each one tearing away another layer of the careful story he'd told himself for 13 years. That he'd been protecting Frank, that his silence had served loyalty rather than fear, that Vincent Torino was a good man who'd made hard choices for honorable reasons. But looking into Elena Rossi's manufactured eyes, Vinny finally understood the truth. He'd been a coward who'd watched his boss sell out the country and convinced himself it was patriotism. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap. Vinny's office felt smaller now, the walls closing in as 13 years of carefully constructed lies crumbled around his feet. Outside, the storm rattled the windows with increasing violence, as if the weather itself was responding to the truth finally clawing its way to the surface. Say it. Elena's voice was soft as velvet, sharp as a razor. Say what you've never let yourself admit. What happened that night in the presidential suite? Vinny's mouth went dry. The photograph lay on his desk between them, evidence of a moment he'd tried to bury so deep it might never surface. But memory was a treacherous thing, and once the first crack appeared, the whole damn wall came down. Frank sold them out, he whispered. The other families. Gave Luciano everything. Who was planning what, which judges were bought, when the next big scores were happening. Turned the commission into his personal intelligence network. And, in return, the words stuck in his throat like broken glass. Vegas. Luciano promised him Vegas would stay clean. No family wars, no federal heat, no interference with the entertainment business. Frank's playground, protected territory. Elena nodded, her manufactured features arranging themselves into an expression of satisfaction. While Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia tore each other apart fighting over scraps. Very clever, very profitable. She moved closer, her presence filling the space between them. Tell me the rest, Vincent. Tell me about the price. The scar over his heart began to burn. Not phantom pain now, but the real thing, as if the bullet was still lodged there after all these years. There was supposed to be a meeting, January 1961, the heads of the 5 families coming to Vegas to discuss territorial disputes. Frank gave Luciano the details. When, where, who would have minimal security. But you never made it to that meeting, did you? Someone found out. Word got back to Sam Giancana that Frank was playing both sides. Vinny's voice cracked, the weight of 13 years pressing down on his chest. They came for him at the Copa. I took the bullet because that's what bodyguards do. But it wasn't random violence. It was a message. Elena's smile was radiant and terrible. A message that said, we know what you did, and we're going to let you live with it. Because a dead martyr is dangerous, but a guilty man is useful. The truth hung between them like a loaded gun. Vinny had spent 13 years telling himself he'd saved Frank's life, that the bullet was proof of his loyalty and courage. But now he saw it for what it really was, a warning shot. Keep your mouth shut about what you witnessed, or the next bullet wouldn't miss vital organs. They kept Frank alive because he was more valuable as a controlled asset than a corpse, Vinny said, the words tasting like ash. And they kept me alive because I was the witness, the one person who could testify to what really happened if Frank ever tried to deny it. Beautiful, isn't it? The symmetry of it all. Elena moved to his desk, her fingers trailing across the photograph like a caress. Mutually assured destruction, organized crime style. Frank couldn't betray them without implicating himself, and they couldn't eliminate him without losing their window into Vegas operations. But something changed. Vinny's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. The families started dying off anyway. Natural causes, federal prosecutions, internal wars. The old agreements stopped mattering. And suddenly Frank Sinatra found himself holding secrets that were more dangerous than useful. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper, especially when certain parties began to wonder if those secrets might be written down somewhere. Insurance policies, evidence that could destroy what's left of the traditional families. The room seemed to tilt around him. That's what you were after, not information about current operations. You wanted to know if Frank had documentation from 1960. Did he tell you, Vincent? In those final moments of weakness, when he thought he was impressing his lost love. Did chairman of the board admit to keeping records? But Vinny was already shaking his head, understanding flooding through him like ice water. You don't know. That's why you're here, why you found me. Frank didn't break completely. Even fooled by your face, he held something back. Elena's perfect composure cracked for just an instant, and in that moment Vinny saw past the manufactured beauty to the desperation underneath. She'd gambled everything on becoming Ava Gardner, had invested months of surgery and preparation, and Frank had still managed to keep his most dangerous secrets locked away. But you think I know, Vinny said slowly. You think the loyal bodyguard might have seen where Frank hid his insurance policy. Elena's hand moved to her purse, and Vinny caught a glimpse of metal inside. Not a gun, something smaller, more precise, the kind of tool used for extracting information from reluctant sources. The question isn't what you know, Vincent, she said quietly. The question is how much pain you're willing to endure before you tell me. Vinny's laugh came out bitter and broken, a sound like glass grinding underfoot. Pain? Lady, I've been carrying pain for 13 years. You think your little torture kit scares me more than what I see in the mirror every morning? Elena's manufactured perfection flickered, surprise replacing the predatory confidence. She'd expected fear, perhaps desperate bargaining. Not this sudden shift from cornered prey to something altogether more dangerous. You want to know where Frank kept his insurance policy? Vinny moved around the desk, each step deliberate, controlled. You spent 18 months turning yourself into a ghost, convinced you could seduce secrets from a dying man. But you missed the most important thing about Frank Sinatra. Vincent. He never trusted anyone completely. Not his wives, not his friends, not even his bodyguards. The words came faster now, 13 years of suppressed truth pouring out like blood from a reopened wound. That night in December, when you think he betrayed the families, Frank was playing a deeper game. Elena's hand tightened on the torture device, her manufactured calm cracking like thin ice. You're lying. Lucky Luciano thought he was getting intelligence to destroy his enemies. Frank let him believe it, fed him just enough truth to stay credible, just enough lies to stay alive. Vinny reached his coat hanging on the wall, moving with careful precision. But the real information, the names, dates, evidence that could bring down everyone from street soldiers to senators, Frank kept that for himself. Where? The question exploded from Elena like a gunshot, all pretense of control abandoned. Where did he hide it? Vinny's hand found the concealed holster sewn into his coat lining, the weight of the .38 solid, and familiar after days of feeling naked. Not regulation, not recorded anywhere in the casino's files. A ghost gun for a man who'd been living as a ghost. He didn't hide it, Vinny said quietly, drawing the weapon with practiced smoothness. He gave it to the one person he knew would never betray him, because that person had already taken a bullet to prove their loyalty. Elena's manufactured eyes went wide, finally understanding. You've had it all along. 13 years of carrying Frank's real secrets, not just what I witnessed, what he documented before, during, and after. Names, photographs, recorded conversations. The gun felt steady in Vinny's hand, an extension of his will. You know what the funny thing is? I never opened it, never looked at what Frank trusted me to keep safe. Then, how do you know? Because Frank told me, right before they wheeled him into surgery. Said if anything happened to him, I'd have enough evidence to bring down half the organized crime families in America. Vinny's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Or enough to get myself killed trying. Elena lunged forward, desperation overriding caution, the torture device gleaming in her hand like a surgical scalpel. But Vincent Torino hadn't survived 15 years as Frank Sinatra's bodyguard by being slow or sentimental. The .38 barked once, the sound deafening in the confined space. Elena stumbled backward, her perfect face registering shock and something that might have been relief. The weapon tumbled from her nerveless fingers as she pressed a hand to her shoulder, blood seeping between her manufactured features. "You don't know what you've done," she gasped. "The people I work for, they'll never stop looking, never stop hunting. Let them come." Vinny kept the gun trained on her, though the immediate threat had passed. "I'm tired of running from ghosts." Through the frosted glass door, he could see movement in the hallway, security guards responding to the gunshot, voices shouting orders. In moments, his office would be flooded with people asking questions he couldn't answer without destroying what remained of his carefully constructed life. But looking at Elena Rossi bleeding on his carpet, her manufactured beauty finally showing cracks, Vinny realized he didn't care about his construction life anymore. 13 years of silence had solved nothing, protected no one, honored nothing worth honoring. The door burst open, Jerry Castellano leading a team of security guards, weapons drawn and ready. But Vinny was already setting his gun on the desk, hands raised, the weight of Frank's secrets finally lifting from his shoulders. "Call the FBI," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd finally found his purpose again. "Tell them Vincent Torino wants to make a deal." Elena's laugh was weak but genuine, blood flecking her perfect lips. "You have no idea what you're starting." "Yeah," Vinny said, looking at his reflection in the storm-dark window one last time. "I do." After 13 years of being dead, Vincent Torino was finally ready to live with the consequences of being alive. Special Agent Patricia Morrison sat across from him in the sterile interview room, a woman whose gray eyes had seen enough lies to recognize truth when it finally surfaced. Between them lay Frank Sinatra's insurance policy, a safety deposit box key and documentation that had brought down 17 organized crime figures in the past month, with more arrests coming daily. "The Boston family is finished," Morrison said, closing another thick file. "Elena Rossi, real name Maria Santos, is cooperating fully now that she understands the alternative. Turns out plastic surgery and manufactured beauty can't stop 25 to life." Vinny nodded, feeling older than his 62 years but somehow lighter. "What about the others? The people she was really working for?" "The commission died with the old guard, Mr. Torino. What's left are glorified street gangs fighting over scraps." Morrison leaned back, studying him with professional curiosity. "You could have used this information 13 years ago. Could have been a hero instead of a ghost. Why now?" The question hung in the air like cigarette smoke. Outside the window, Atlantic City stretched toward the horizon, the same gray ocean that had witnessed his years of self-imposed exile. Vinny thought about Frank's voice in that hospital corridor, pressing the safety deposit box key into his palm with hands that trembled from more than surgery. "Because I finally understood that keeping Frank's secrets wasn't loyalty," he said quietly. "It was cowardice dressed up as honor. The bullet I took wasn't proof of my devotion, it was a warning to stay quiet about what I'd seen." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "You saved lives by coming forward. Those territorial wars Elena's people were planning would have turned Atlantic City into a battlefield." "Maybe." Vinny looked down at his hands, still steady despite everything they'd done. "Or maybe I just got tired of being a dead man walking around in Vincent Torino's skin." The interview room door opened, and Jerry Castellano stepped inside looking uncomfortable in his best suit. The casino had suspended Vinny immediately after the shooting, standard procedure that felt more like mercy than punishment. Jerry carried an envelope that he set on the table with obvious reluctance. "Severance package," Jerry said gruffly. "Casino's position is you acted to protect the establishment from criminal infiltration. No charges, full pension, clean recommendation if you want to work again." Vinny smiled at that. Work again, at 62, with a reputation for shooting customers. Customers like Elena Rossi, the casino business could use more men willing to pull triggers, Jerry replied. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Vinny, you did right. Took balls to stand up after all these years. After Jerry left, Morrison gathered her files with practiced efficiency. You're free to go, Mr. Torino. The grand jury testimony won't be for another month, but your cooperation agreement is solid. New identity if you want it. Witness protection if you feel threatened. No. The word came out firmly, surprising them both. I'm done hiding. Vincent Torino dies today, but not because he's scared, because he's finally served his purpose. Vinny walked out of the federal building into afternoon sunlight that felt like absolution. The Atlantic City boardwalk stretched before him. Tourists and families enjoying simple pleasures that had nothing to do with bullets or betrayal. He thought about Frank Sinatra, about loyalty and cowardice, about the weight of secrets and the lightness that came from finally setting them free. The bullet scar over his heart no longer ached. For the first time in 13 years, Vincent Torino felt like he was breathing with both lungs. He found a bench facing the ocean and sat down to watch the waves roll in, each one carrying away another piece of the man he'd been. Somewhere in the distance, a street musician was playing My Way, Frank's signature song, rendered small and intimate by a saxophone that had seen better decades. Vinny laughed, surprising himself with the sound. Even in death, Frank Sinatra was having the last word, but that was all right. Vincent Torino had found his own way at last, and the ocean that had witnessed his exile now blessed his return to the land of the living. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new challenges, maybe new threats from what remained of the old families. Tonight, though, he was just a man on a bench, watching the sun set over water that reflected nothing but possibility. After 13 years of carrying other people's secrets, Vincent Torino was finally free to discover his own. The music faded, the tourists headed home, and the ocean kept its eternal rhythm. In the growing darkness, a man who had learned the difference between loyalty and truth walked slowly back toward whatever came next.